In the summer of 1944, as American forces pushed westward across the Pacific, a small island in the Palau group seemed like an easy target. Its name was Peleliu. To the commanders planning Operation Stalemate, it represented merely a stepping stone, a minor objective whose airfield could be neutralized in days. 72 hours, they estimated. 3 days to secure the island, eliminate the garrison, and move on. They were catastrophically wrong. What awaited the Marines of the 1st Marine Amphibious Corps was not a disorganized remnant of the Japanese military, but a meticulously prepared defensive masterpiece. On the morning of September 15, 1944, thousands of young Americans would step onto the black volcanic sand of Peleliu's beaches. Many would not leave alive. Those who did would carry the scars, visible and invisible, for the rest of their lives. This is the story of Peleliu, not as a footnote in history books, but as it unfolded through the eyes of the men who fought there. A story of courage, sacrifice, and a brutal lesson in the unpredictability of war. A story that, for decades, America would struggle to remember, as to the Pacific War in 1944 had become a grinding progression. Island after island fell to American forces. Each victory brought the Allies closer to Japan, but each battle extracted an increasingly terrible price. By September, the strategic calculus had shifted. General Douglas MacArthur's advance through the Southwest Pacific was proceeding methodically. But in the Central Pacific, Admiral Chester Nimitz commanded a parallel campaign, leapfrogging across enemy territory with devastating speed. Peleliu lay in the Palau Islands, approximately 800 miles east of the Philippines. To Nimitz and his planners, it held a deceptively simple value: its airfield. An airfield in Japanese hands could interfere with the proposed invasion of Mindanao. An airfield in American hands could provide air cover for future operations. The solution seemed obvious. Seize the island, neutralize the airfield, move forward. The tactical assessment was clinical. The island measured roughly 6 miles long and 2 miles wide, compact, manageable. Intelligence reports suggested a garrison of 10,000 Japanese soldiers. Against them would come the 1st Marine Division, reinforced by artillery and air support. The operation was designated Stalemate 2. Command predicted 72 hours. 72 hours to transform Peleliu from a Japanese stronghold into an American asset. What the planners did not fully grasp was the nature of their opponent. The Japanese commander on Peleliu was Colonel Kunio Nakagawa. Unlike many Japanese officers bound by the samurai code of honor and frontal assault, Nakagawa represented a new school of strategic thought. He had observed previous island battles, Tarawa, Saipan, Guam. He had learned from their failures. He understood American firepower, American tactics, American psychology. Nakagawa had made a decision that violated conventional Japanese doctrine. He would not defend the beaches. He would not charge. Instead, he would retreat into the island's interior, into its forbidding terrain, and make every square foot of ground a killing zone. Dawned clear and hot over Peleliu. The preliminary bombardment had been intense. Naval guns, aircraft, and artillery pounded the island for 3 days. American commanders were confident. How could anything survive such devastation? The first wave of Marines approached the beach in their assault craft, weapons ready, nerves taut. What they encountered was an eerie silence. The beaches were empty. No machine gun fire. No organized resistance. Casualty predictions evaporated. For the first hour, the Marines advanced inland almost unopposed, walking through abandoned positions, past destroyed blockhouses and wrecked fortifications. Some commanders began to believe the intelligence reports had been wrong. Perhaps the garrison was smaller than expected. Perhaps the bombardment had been more effective than anticipated. Then, as the Marines pushed deeper, the silence ended. It began with scattered rifle fire from hidden positions. Then machine guns stuttered from camouflaged bunkers. Artillery shells began to rain down from inland positions. The Marines realized, with dawning horror, that they had not penetrated Japanese defenses. They had simply not reached them yet. The soft landing had been a deception born of absence, not weakness. By day's end, the Marines had suffered casualties numbering in the hundreds. The easy victory had vanished. What remained was the beginning of a nightmare. The Japanese, meanwhile, executed their strategy with precision. Nakagawa's forces allowed the Americans to land, allowed them to advance, and then compressed them with coordinated fire from multiple directions. The further inland the Marines pushed, the denser the Japanese defenses became. And it was only day 1. The second day of the Peleliu campaign brought clarity and horror in equal measure. The Marines, having established a beachhead and dug in for the night, now understood the scale of what they faced. Casualties were mounting far beyond the initial estimates. Supply lines were strained. Wounded men were piling up faster than medical teams could process them. Intelligence officers began to report the truth. The Japanese garrison was not 10,000. It was closer to 13,000. And they were not scattered or demoralized. They were organized, disciplined, and fighting with a tenacity that American forces had come to expect from the Japanese military, but rarely with such tactical sophistication. What made Peleliu different from previous island battles was its terrain. Unlike the relatively flat coral atolls of the Central Pacific, Peleliu was a maze of limestone ridges, caves, crevasses, and dense jungle. The Japanese had transformed these natural features into a fortress. Every ridge line was fortified. Every cave was a potential stronghold. Every ravine could become a killing zone. Warfare and island assaults against prepared positions found themselves in an urban combat environment trapped in a jungle landscape. Tanks, artillery, and aerial bombardment, all the tools of American military dominance, were frequently useless. The enemy was too close, too concealed, too integrated into the terrain. Tank commanders discovered their vehicles became targets for Japanese anti-tank guns and suicide squads. Infantry advancing through the jungle faced ambush from every direction. Forward observers struggling to direct artillery found it impossible to locate enemy positions concealed in caves and crevasses. And when explosives destroyed one Japanese position, the Marines would advance only to face 3 more behind it. By September 17th, 48 hours into the operation, the 1st Marine Division had suffered over 2,000 casualties. The beaches were clogged with wounded men waiting for transport. The casualty rate was climbing faster than commanders had thought possible. And they had only moved a few miles inland. The message was becoming clear to everyone on the island. This would not be 72 hours. This would be a long, grinding struggle, exactly what Colonel Nakagawa had planned. To understand Peleliu, you must understand its landscape. The island's interior was dominated by a ridgeline formation called Umerbergal Heights, a jumbled maze of coral limestone peaks rising 600 feet above the jungle floor. These peaks were not connected by accessible slopes. Instead, they were separated by deep crevasses and narrow valleys. Jungle vegetation, thick, dense, and suffocating, covered everything. For a conventional army, such terrain is nightmare territory. For the Japanese defenders, it was a fortress designed by nature and improved by engineering. Nakagawa's men had spent months preparing the terrain for defense. They had carved bunkers into hillsides. They had placed artillery pieces in caves that could rain fire down on any advancing force. They had booby-trapped every approach, every valley, every possible avenue of advance. Asterisk and the Marines found that traditional assault tactics, charge, overwhelm, push forward, were virtually useless. A frontal assault up a ridge face would result in devastating casualties from Japanese defenders positioned above. Flanking movements took hours to organize and were easily anticipated and met with prepared defensive fire. Artillery, the American Army's greatest advantage, was frustratingly limited by the dense terrain and risk of friendly fire. Asterisk every morning, units would advance a few hundred yards. Every afternoon, they would face a fierce counterattack. Every evening, they would dig in, exhausted, covered in blood and dirt. Every night, Japanese sniper teams would infiltrate the lines, fighting one-on-one with Marines in the darkness. The heat was crushing, tropical, humid, relentless. Men lost consciousness from heat exhaustion while still holding weapons. The jungle provided no clean water and no shelter. Fungal infections began to appear within days. Dysentery began to claim casualties as efficiently as Japanese bullets. The psychological toll was severe. Men faced an enemy they could rarely see, assaulting positions they could barely identify, advancing through terrain that seemed determined to kill them as surely as the Japanese. Officers began to understand a terrible truth. Peleliu could not be defeated by speed or shock. It could only be conquered by attrition. They would have to kill the Japanese soldier by soldier, position by position, one agonizing day at a time. Asterisk on the morning of the invasion, the Japanese commander Colonel Kunio Nakagawa made a radio broadcast to his men. He did not call for a glorious last stand on the beaches. He did not demand suicide charges. Instead, he issued orders that seemed almost defeatist to commanders steeped in samurai culture. Retreat into the island. Set up defensive positions. Make the enemy come to you. Kill as many Americans as possible. This strategy was revolutionary for Japanese military doctrine. It was rooted not in tradition, but in tactical reality. Nakagawa understood that Japanese troops, no matter how dedicated, could not defeat American firepower in an open battle. But they could inflict casualties, and casualty rates mattered. If Peleliu cost America enough men, enough machines, enough time, perhaps commanders would recalculate the cost-benefit analysis of the Pacific campaign. Perhaps it would slow the American advance. Perhaps it would buy Japan time for an armistice or negotiated peace. Nakagawa was a soldier of remarkable intelligence and courage. Unlike the brutal militarists who had led Japan into the war, Nakagawa was a tactical thinker. He had served with distinction in China. He understood modern warfare. And he had learned from the failures of commanders who had clung to suicidal tactics. His plan for Peleliu was this: allow the Americans to land unopposed. Draw them inland. Let them advance through increasingly prepared defensive positions. Bleed them. Harass them. Make every yard of progress costly in blood. Then, when momentum shifted, counterattack to disrupt their reorganization. And finally, retreat to the most defensible terrain, Umerbergol Heights, and make a final stand that would cost the Americans dearly in both casualties and time. It was a plan designed not for victory, but for strategic significance. Nakagawa knew he could not defeat America, but he could ensure that Peleliu became a symbol of the cost of Pacific warfare, a cost that might influence Japanese negotiators, American politicians, and the ultimate shape of the war's conclusion. As the battle unfolded, Nakagawa's strategy proved devastatingly effective. The Marines found themselves fighting not a disorganized enemy, but a disciplined force executing a masterful defensive plan. At 16 by the 8th day of the operation, the reality had set in for everyone involved. This would not end in days. It would not end in weeks. The 1st Marine Division had suffered over 3,000 casualties. The 2nd Division had been committed, and they too were suffering appalling losses. And yet, Peleliu remained firmly in Japanese hands. The Americans controlled the beaches and some of the lower elevation areas, but the Japanese still held the commanding terrain. The battle had transformed into a grinding war of attrition. Companies that began the invasion with over 200 men were now reduced to 50 or 60. Platoon leaders were 18-year-old corporals promoted in the field. Squad leaders were privates making life-and-death decisions. The constant pressure was eroding morale, discipline, and unit cohesion. *7*, and yet, the Marines advanced. Slowly, bitterly, at enormous cost, they inched forward. Progress was measured not in miles, but in 100-yard increments. Every ridge taken was followed by another ridge. Every position captured revealed 3 more defended positions beyond it. The Japanese conducted fierce counterattacks at night, attempting to dislodge the Marines and drive them back toward the beach. Some of these counterattacks came close to breaking American lines. But each time, the Marines rallied, called down supporting fire, and held. The casualty ratio was roughly 2 or 3 Japanese soldiers for every American killed. A mathematical victory for the United States, but a human tragedy for everyone involved. *Teen supplies began to run short. Water was rationed. Ammunition was carefully controlled. Medevac flights could not keep up with the wounded. The combination of combat casualties, disease, and heat exhaustion meant that American combat strength was declining even as commanders demanded continued offensive operations. By September 23, the 1st Marine Division, one of the most elite fighting units in the American military, was effectively destroyed as a combat force. Over 6,000 casualties, nearly a third of its total strength, had been inflicted in 9 days. The division was rotated off the line. But the battle for Peleliu continued. As the Marine divisions were rotated out, the Army's 81st Infantry Division took over the campaign. Fresh troops, but terrain that had already claimed thousands of lives. And the Japanese had retreated exactly where Nakagawa planned, to Umurbergal Heights, the island's most defensible terrain. Umurbergal was a maze of limestone peaks, caverns, and crevasses. The Japanese had fortified it extensively over months of preparation. Artillery batteries were positioned in caves that opened toward the valleys. Machine gun positions covered every approach. Ammunition and food supplies had been cached throughout the peaks. The fortress was designed to be self-sustaining, capable of being defended even if cut off from the rest of the island. American infantry found themselves literally climbing vertical rock faces while under fire. Progress required each unit to approach the enemy from multiple angles simultaneously, using hand-over-hand climbing to reach positions, while Japanese soldiers above them had the advantage of both terrain and preparation. Flamethrower teams were brought forward. They would ignite the mouths of caves, hoping to burn out Japanese defenders or force them to surrender. Many Japanese soldiers chose to die rather than surrender. It was the culmination of propaganda, training, and the knowledge that the American treatment of Japanese prisoners was unpredictable at best. Weeks. Every day, progress measured in dozens of yards. Every day, casualties mounting. The battle became a media story. Journalists covering the forgotten islands of the Pacific began to question whether the cost was justified. General MacArthur's path through the Philippines seemed to offer more strategic value than grinding through this jungle fortress. By late October, nearly 2 months after the invasion began, the Japanese were finally broken. Nakagawa conducted a final radio broadcast to his men, thanking them for their sacrifice, and then committed suicide. The remaining Japanese garrison either surrendered or died fighting in isolated pockets throughout the hills. Peleliu was finally secured. but the cost would echo through history. The final body count was staggering. The 1st Marine Division suffered 6,526 casualties. The 81st Army Division suffered nearly 3,300 casualties. In total, American forces took over 9,800 casualties on Peleliu, killed, wounded, and missing. Nearly 2,000 American servicemen died on the island. The Japanese garrison of 13,000 soldiers was virtually annihilated. Fewer than 200 prisoners were taken. The rest died fighting. Colonel Nakagawa achieved exactly what he had set out to do. He made Peleliu extraordinarily costly for the United States. And for what? The tactical value of Peleliu proved minimal. The airfield, which had been the original objective, was destroyed in the bombardment and was never fully repaired or used by American forces. The operation, intended as a stepping stone to the Philippines, turned out to be unnecessary. MacArthur's strategy proved superior, and Peleliu became a sideshow, important only for the blood spilled on its volcanic sand. Many historians and military analysts have concluded that the invasion of Peleliu was strategically unnecessary and tactically mismanaged. The price paid was far too high for the benefit gained. It stands as a monument to the fog of war, to faulty intelligence, and to the brutal calculus of military decision-making. *5 Today, Peleliu is largely forgotten in American historical consciousness. Iwo Jima, Okinawa, and the Philippines loom larger in popular memory. Even Saipan and Guam receive more historical attention. But Peleliu remains, a testament to sacrifice rendered for unclear purpose. The survivors of Peleliu carried trauma that would shape their lives. Some became vocal critics of the operation, questioning the strategic rationale and the cost in American lives. Others remained silent, unable or unwilling to process what they had experienced. Many suffered from what we now recognize as post-traumatic stress disorder, though that diagnosis did not exist during their era. The island itself slowly recovered. Today, it is a peaceful place. A few monuments mark American sacrifice. Japanese and American graves dot the landscape. Tourists occasionally visit, though the island remains isolated and remote.